Hey, how's it going again? This is Mr. Miles coming at you with Lesson 2. And this Lesson 2 should cover the vocabulary and some of the key concepts that we went over on in this lesson. So, the first thing, you guys remember we were talking about groups today. We're talking about groups and why groups are so important. As humans, we like to group things. Your parents may not believe it, but even you as children, you guys like to group things. You like to keep things together and in order. Not always, not when it comes to finding your favorite shirt, your mom's favorite shirt for grandma's 87th birthday, or finding your homework, or finding something because she's in a hurry and she's got to get somewhere. But with other things, like if it's something important, like your favorite video game, you're going to be able to find it. You're going to be able to group it together, and you know where it goes. You know where your shoes go. You know where the cars go. You know where everything goes, for the most part. We like to group things together. Now, in biology, we find out that there's over 1 million different species of organisms. That's a lot. And this chapter mainly focuses on how do we group these 1 million different animals. So the first thing I asked you guys, and some of you got mad at me with this one because I asked a lot of probing questions, and I wanted a very specific answer. So species. What makes a species? And I asked you that question, and we had different things like characteristics, traits, stuff like that. But the whole thing is you can't go by that. You can't go by traits of an animal, because you can train dogs to act like cats. You can have cats that act like dogs. You can have people act like almost any animal. You just ask them to, and they'll do their very best to imitate that animal. Monkeys can imitate other animals. Fish can imitate other ones. Some of them even use this. Will try to act like another animal in order to evade predators. You get flies that'll act like bees because you don't want to go and hurt a bee because a bee could sting you. But you'll have flies that act like bees, so you really can't use that. Some of you guys said the food that they eat, and that's not true, because sometimes what my dog, if I eat a hot dog, my dog is drooling so it can eat that hot dog. And I'm not a dog, and the dog's not a human. But really what it comes down to this. Can it reproduce? But not only can it reproduce, but can it reproduce offspring that can reproduce? And let's get into that. So you can't have a dog and a cat mate and have a dog-cat. It just can't happen. You can't have a wolf, you can't have a frog mate. Nothing will happen. And we'll get into more of this when we learn about genetics. But that can't happen. A dog is its own individual species, and it can only mate with other dogs. Cats, same thing. Wolves, same thing. Frogs, same thing. That's why they're all their own individual species. And especially with frogs, as you get down into the species of frogs, that they can't mate with each other. So, an example of what I'm talking about, if it can mate, so two dogs can mate, and that dog can mate with another dog and have it. But you have problems where you have something like this. You have a tiger, you have a lion. What happens when they mate? And a lot of you guys are very familiar with these, but I did have somebody like, oh, that doesn't really exist, I don't believe you. You get a liger. You get a liger. Look it up on YouTube or on Google. These things are incredibly awesome. They are gigantic. But here's the whole thing. A lion and a tiger can make a liger, but two ligers can't make another liger. It just can't happen. And again, like I said, once we get to genetics and chromosomes, it'll make more sense. Now, because of this, a liger is technically not a species. Instead, it's actually a hybrid. So it's not a real species of animal. So for something to be a species, it has to be able to mate with each other, have offspring, and then mate. That offspring has to be able to mate with the same species and be able to have offspring, and it can't do that. Another classic thing is a mule. Mules can't mate with each other and create more mules. So let's get into the vocab word now that we know what a species is. So now we know what the species is, we want to do something called classification. And remember, I told you guys always to break up the word and look for it. Whoops! I didn't mean to do it there. Hold on one second. Fix this. So what I was trying to do was right here. Classify. So when you classify something, what is it? You group. When you classify something, you are simply grouping it together. And this can be living things, this can be organisms, or non-living things. You can classify pens and pencils, saying these are pens, these are pencils. Now, the next word that you get into is taxonomy. Taxonomy. Now, taxonomy means to classify organisms. So you're classifying organisms. So no longer can you use taxonomy as classifying pens or pencils. It has to be a living thing. Taxonomy means to classify organisms. So you have to know what classification and classify means. It means to group an organism. So we're grouping organisms together. Now how do we do this? Well, this big nasty word, the one that I warned you guys about, it's this one. Oh, whoops. Nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. Again, this is a big nasty word. Let's break it down. So bi, we know bi means two. That's why you ride on a bicycle. Nomial, simpler word, is name. So it means to name. Nomenclature, just think of it like classify. So it means to name, classify. You can look on your book, page 16. You can see on the bottom you have two different animals. You have the common house cat. It's known as Felis domesticus, and the marbled cat, which is known as Felis marmorata. And sometimes the names get a little bit complicated because, again, like I said, this is all written in Latin. It's a whole different language. And so the reason that they do these two names and the reason that they do it in this Latin is because they elected it to be the universal science language. So whenever they spoke in names or specific science things, they would always use Latin. That way, somebody from Germany, I can't turn Germany. So there's Germany, and then France could talk with one another. And these same guys go all the way across the pond. Actually found out that people in England and stuff like that don't say across the pond. Oh, there's a terrible United States. I don't know, that's water. You can go all the way across here, and they could talk using the scientific names in Latin, and they could understand one another. And that's extremely important because a lot of times we have common names. Like we have something called a daddy longleg. And the thing with daddy longleg is, here's a good example of why it's so confusing. So in America we have things called daddy longlegs. And there was a rumor going around that daddy longlegs, and maybe you've heard this before, are the most poisonous spider ever, but because their fangs are too small, they can't bite us, and so they can't give us poison. Well, that's not true, because that would be if you had an open cut and daddy longleg decided to spit in there, it would kill you instantly if it's the most deadliest poison. And they were saying this is the most deadliest poison by far. Well, the reason that rumor got started was because actually in Europe they have something, a spider, that has long legs, but it's not the same spider that we're used to. They also call that same spider the daddy longlegs. So the problem is when we were hearing about this, about how poisonous this spider was in Europe called the daddy longlegs, we assumed because of its name it was the same one that we have here. That's why we have those Latin names, so we don't get confusion like that. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about, and this one's just a nice short one, now that we understand those basic ones, is the levels of classification. The levels of classification. And you guys remember the acronym for it? Dumb kids playing chess on freeway get smacked. And we know that stands for domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And again, like I said, and somebody so eloquently put this in class, think of it as an upside down pyramid. Species is a single point, because when you talk about species, you're talking about only one species, but domain encompasses all living organisms, and then it breaks down further and further and further and further. And look on page 19, and they do a really good example with what we commonly call an owl. So if you look at that, you can see how it kind of breaks it down. And so that's pretty much the main concepts that we went over. So make sure that you understand these. Your next test is going to be this next week. I'm hoping for the middle of the week, but it might be a little more towards the end of the week, depending on the speed that we go. But you guys have a great time. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. Remember, it's bmiles@somersetnlv.org. Don't put com, put org. All right, take care. Bye.